I'm Unbound Sage, and today I'd like to talk about imprints. Two big things here. One, we'll be covering basic questions about imprints from the community, and two, we're going to be covering how information of imprints can impact our ability to theory craft before the game comes out. We have a lot of information now about how different effects stack with each other. So stick around if you're interested in that, but we'll start with the basic questions first. So first thing here I'd like to talk about is everything in this video is from the alpha and subject to change when it comes to me answering these basic questions, right? Later on, when we talk about the stuff Simon talked about, and that's a little bit more concrete, but obviously that is also subject to change. That being said, let's get into the first question here. Do weapons link to a hero or do imprints link to a weapon or a hero? It links to a weapon, and then that weapon is equipped by a hero. So basically what happens is your weapon comes standard with an effect. So something like the Raw's weapon does more dot damage, and then when you put an imprint on it, it'll become like the Aten of Morgan Le Fay, right? And then it'll have Morgan Le Fay's effect and the Aten effect, and then you can equip that weapon to a hero, and you can freely take that weapon off and put it onto another hero. So I can put it onto my Raw. Okay, I'm going to put it onto my Citizen then. Okay, I'm going to move it to my whoever, right? And so, and you know, so when you're thinking about weapons and imprints, you know, Morgan Le Fay imprint with a, with an Aten makes a lot of sense, you know, because a lot of heroes, they're going to use both of those passive effects, the Aten passive and the imprint from Morgan Le Fay. But, you know, it really narrows that weapon to those heroes. Sometimes it'll be a case where like, hey, there is a hero like Hercules who wants a weapon with a very different imprint combo that only works for Hercules, right? So if I do this combination, it's going to stay on Hercules forever versus the Aten example that'll bounce around. So a lot of consideration there, a lot of depth there. Can you equip more than one imprint to more than one weapon? The answer is no. They are consumable. So I can't have, if I have one Morgan Le Fay imprint, I can't equip it to the Aten, and I can't go ahead and equip it to like a Makahito, right? They are like they're consumables, right? So when you put it in, when you slot it in there, your Morgan Le Fay imprint is now enchanting that, and you can't. It's not like a source, right? It's a consumable, right? Can I switch it as much as I want? You can switch the weapon around. At the current time, my understanding is, and once again, this is subject to change, right? Is you cannot. What does that mean? It means once you take your materia, if you're a Final Fantasy VII guy, and put it into your weapon, it's locked, right? It's on that weapon forever. So that's why you might hear people talk about, well, you know, you might not use your imprint right away because your legendary weapon you get is going to have random stats, I imagine. I don't think we're going to be able to select the stats on them. And we haven't heard anything about like reforging stats on legendary weapons, right? In the alpha, right? And this is why I talk about the alpha experience. We just kept farming legendary weapons until it got the stats we wanted. So we heard that getting legendary weapons will be difficult. So I don't know how feasible that will be. Maybe they'll have a reroll system. Maybe they'll have whatever. But they also are open to suggestion about a system to remove imprints, right? It's not going to be at the start of early access, but, you know, this is a system they do want to play around with. And I think the next question will help, you know, tie that in, right? Is does it only come from duplicate heroes, right? Could you only get imprints? You know, do I have to grind down my Morgan Le Fay to get her imprint? The answer is no, but that's the most consistent way. This is something we have the least information about, but they talked about there was a separation from imprints and awakening. In the alpha, you could use imprints to awaken heroes. Now you cannot, right? And so what does that mean is they want to give imprints out as rewards more often. And so, you know, you might see the top of a tournament may get a legendary imprint, right? And that may be a way to get it. There is also the Echo system, and that was talked about, is the old God Forging system. And Simon said in his video, it's the Echo summoning system. right? That has led some people to believe that you will get an actual duplicate champion instead of just it's supposed to be used for awakening. But if you get a duplicate hero from the ecosystem, and once again, this is just wild speculation on the community, but that could be a way to make almost like a printer for this imprint, right? So I've heard someone in the community talk about, well, I'm going to take Wukong as my minigame hero, and I'm going to use the ecosystem, the echo summoning system, because that's what Simon called it in the monetization video, to just summon more Wukongs and literally have a Wukong money printer, right? An imprint printer, right? And I won't use them for awakenings. I'll use them for, for imprints, which is it's a cool idea, right? So I hope they do that. I hope the ecosystem does give you a duplicate hero, but at the very least, you'll be able to get it from events, right? And so that would be pretty fun. Can I equip more imprint to more than the owner of the imprint? This is a question like, does the Wukong imprint only go into Wukong? No. The answer is no. It's supposed to mix and match, right? And that's the basic community stuff. I want to thank Soplin for gathering these for me. I want to say that at the beginning, but Soplin, he definitely reached out to me and said, hey, the community is having some issues with imprints. Can you give a basic overview? So that's the Q&A section done. We're going to go ahead and move over to, oh yeah, first of all, subscribe. I'm bad to call of action, so I put it in the slideshow. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. We do this stuff all the time. If you like this in-depth information, go ahead and, you won't be disappointed by subscribing to the channel. Okay. Next up, I forgot to make this white. Oh, well. There are types of imprints, right? And the biggest thing you want to know here is passive and imprints are just two instances. I think I spelled that wrong, right? But it's two instances of the same effect. However, Simon says that imprints and passives work. I read this as this is how all effects in this class are going to work together. So this is very, very important to theory crafting, right? This will give us insight on how these effects interact outside of the passives of the game. I think the biggest one that this affects, right, is stat increases, right, versus damage amp. So there are I have 6 types of things I want to talk about. There is damage amp, right? There is buffs, debuffs. There is stat, and these are like classical. They show up on the bar, right? This is like your curse, your attack up, your whatever, right? Stat increases, damage reduction, instant effects, and other miscellaneous static effects, right? Because all of these 4 are technically stack effects, but they have rules, and I want to break up the ones we don't know the rules about, into a separate thing. And then instant effects, right? I took the term instant effects from the what is it named? Raven Pyros in his website. He has these listed as instant effects on his filter, or he did. I haven't been to Raven's site in a while, but the big thing here, right, is we're going to go through these and see how these stack together and what we can glean from them, right? So first of all, damage amp is multiplicative. It's good, right? And so we assumed it was multiplicative, or at least I did, because of the huge damage numbers we got from Fafnir, right? If you look at the top winners of Soplin and Jaco Joker, right? They did the top damage to Fafnir. They used 2 bugs that had damage amp. It was the Radiance for Brynhild, right? Stacking Radiance is stacking. I imagine it was stacking that damage buff. And then the Le Jacques damage amp. So those were 2 damage amps that were bugged, multiplying against each other. That's how you got those crazy big numbers. If they were additive, they never would have done that level of damage, right? So we always assume that damage amp was multiplicative, and now we have the confirmation. So when you see a damage amp passive, it is likely to be good right here. And so when you see this here with Vivian, right? Allies inflict more damage with their basic attack, and this is double when joining attacks. If you put her imprint, maybe not on herself, but put it on one of the teammates of Vivian, right? Especially someone like Wukong who's doing this anyway. These damage amps stack, right? The 40% doubled and the 20%, right? They're multiplicative. That's more than 80% damage. So remember that. That's very, very good. Yeah, so damage amp in general is good, especially if you see something like Guan Yu. That's like in the early game, if you pull a few Guan Yus, and it says does extra damage to people under drain, those are multiplicative. So Guan Yu with a Guan Yu imprint will in the early game might be something we look into, right? I don't know. A lot of Guan Yu's damage comes from the basic, but you get the idea, right? Damage amp is multiplicative and is generally good to stack. My caveat here is stacking damage amp onto Slayers is risky, because we've seen the alpha that Slayers often need their imprint slot for survivability. The kind of duet was a huge example of that in the alpha, where it was almost mandatory on Slayers to have the Hana duet to survive some encounters, right? Which is a survival imprint. So keep this in mind. Buff/debuffs, they know stack is bad. Don't stack. Don't stack these together. And so at the start of the turn, you put curse on the enemy with the highest attack, and then you have a 50% chance to put curse on the enemy with the highest attack. So stacking the Hades imprint with the Hades passive, it just makes 2 instances of curse 2, and we know that they whatever. The only caveat would be bleed, right? Because bleed does stack. So if there was a passive that was handing out bleeds, that would be a different story. I haven't seen any that give bleeds, right? But bleeds is the caveat here. And so I want to go back here again to, this is important for theory crafting, right? So if you want to do big boy damage, you want to stack damage amp, right? And then this also goes down to damage amp. We'll get to the next thing, right? Stat increases is additive, which is fine. It's not great. I heard someone talk to me and say, oh, doesn't these changes mean that Hell gets ×3 attack when you revive 10 times? No, because this is not damage amp. You can think of it as damage amp, but you have to remember there is a difference between a stat increase and damage amplification, right? And so, see Vivian, increased damage, that's damage amp. See this is increased attack. So if there are no other effects going on, this is 10% damage amp if there are no other effects going on. And this is multiplicative with damage amp, but it is additive with other sources of attack. And this leads me to some interesting places, right? So first of all, I would like to say, for the record, Hell's imprint on herself is actually good if you're doing the revival thing, right? Because this is still a lot of attack. It may be her best imprint still. So like, this may be a bad example to talk about how bad it is, but something like Grendel, we have to get the low HP to get a little bit of speed. That's not a good idea. Also, this is what I talk about outside the game. This helps us. Freya, on her ultimate, has stacking attack. We know it is additive to other attack stuff, right? So if you have Hell and Freya on the same team, you're getting a little bit of diminishing returns, right? I don't mean diminishing returns, but you're getting additive like stacking, which isn't as good for your damage amp. But she does give you crit damage, which is always multiplicative against attack on critical hits. So my biggest question here that is unsolved, right? And I think this is fun. I think this is how the game should be. It's fine. It makes the damage calcs easier, honestly, so it's fine. And this is a pretty corner case. A lot of things are damage amp in this game, but for stat increases, right, it's okay. My question is, how do these attacks interact with attack up? The actual buff attack up. Is attack up 2 multiplicative or additive with these stat increases? And I think that will be the biggest caveat for me. I think it should be multiplicative, but I'm not sure, right? I think buffs are going to play a little bit differently when you do whatever, but this is actually good for subtracting buffs too. So if you have a passive that is, taking away defense from an enemy, right? Like we have the Mako Hito that does that. And then Ares, when he strong hits, removes defense. That's additive defense removal, right? if it works the same way as stat increases, which I don't see why it wouldn't. So that means stacking on defense removal is actually something we're interested in. So keep that in mind, right? Damage reduction is multiplicative, and that is bad in asterisk. It's still good, right? But it's not whatever. So we see here we get 30% damage reduction, and we get 15% damage reduction here. I will tell you this. The champions that give team-wide damage reduction do not need damage reduction. Damage reduction is best on characters with low defense and investment. The higher your defense is, the more redundant, right? The more diminishing returns you get, even on your first copy of DR. So, you know, if you have a Svarog here with like 6k defense, and then he already has 30% DR in his kit, adding this to Svarog is it's a drop in the bucket, man. Like, your defense is already cutting your damage in half, or like in like you know, you might be taking quarter damage with that high of defense. I haven't done the damage. I don't know the damage formula for damage reduction due to defense, but you get the idea. You might already be taking quarter damage, and you're taking 30% of a quarter, and then now you're taking 50% of like whatever's left. Like, but these effects are really good to stack, or are better to stack on high HP targets like brawlers. So if you have a Svarog on your team with a brawler as your damage dealer, and he needs more survivability, smacking the Svarog imprint on your brawler, who doesn't have a lot of defense but has a lot of HP to use that damage reduction, is actually a really good idea, because they're not getting that first source of DR, which is defense, right? What Svarog is. And this also means that bigger sources of damage reduction are more impressive than a lot of smaller sources of damage reduction, right? So a big 30% is a lot more impressive than 3 instances of 10%. So something to keep in mind. So yeah, don't stack DR on your defenders. They already have a lot of DR from defense. It's better to stack it on brawlers. And if you have an invoker that's high HP, and you know, something like a Solde, for example, where she hears a lot about HP because she gives that heal when defenders are attacked. DR is actually really good on her. So, but less good on defenders. Anyway, next. Now, instant effects. If you want to know what an instant effect is, go to Raven Pyros' website, go to the filter, and go to look at the instant effects here. Right, but this is stuff like healing, turn meter, divinity, removing debuffs. And you get multiple rules, right? And so, like, you know, for the team attack for Wukong, right? You can't team attack twice on one attack, so that's wasted. So that's actually bad. That's where the maybe comes in. I have, for instance, here, Isis, because I want to talk about this for a second. You might say to yourself, well, stacking Isis is bad, right? You're losing remove buffs and disables from an enemy, and you're getting a 5% heal. Who cares, right? Well, what if you have an encounter that you have damage tuned, right? And you have it where, you know, everyone has a CC, and then it's Isis's turn. Her passive goes off. She heals the target with the lowest HP and clears the disable. And then that heal makes them no longer the ally with the lowest HP. The imprint triggers, and now it targets a different hero. And then for free every turn, you are fully cleansing 2 heroes. We don't know if that's how it works or not, by the way. But like, this is something I see, right? The imprint, the passive does its effect. Then the imprint does its effect. It depends when this target is chosen, I imagine. But I think if I read this correctly, you could do that. You could actually damage tune the Pantheon boss to do 2 full cleanses, right? Which would be crazy amount of work. But in the case of Isis, I think stacking her passive imprint, if it works that way, is something I'm interested in looking into, right? For other stuff like healing and turn meter up or turn meter down or whatever, it depends. It just does the effect twice, right? And so if you're interested in having that effect twice, or if that effect could even happen twice in the case of Wukong, where you cannot join the same attack twice, right? So that effect, those effects are not on void, but obviously healing can happen multiple times. Turn meter up can happen multiple times. So, think of them as two separate things happening, right? So it's a big maybe, right? It's a case by case. And then lastly, we have miscellaneous stats effects. No idea. No idea how these work, right? Is this healing reduction 75% healing reduction? Is it 62.5% healing reduction? How does this interact with curse? Is this 100% healing reduction with curse? Is this 75% healing reduction with curse, right? We don't know. And so if you see an effect here that is not an instant effect, that's something we're not covered. I think the two big ones are this healing reduction imprint, and also the strong hit chance up, like the Mulan stuff, right? I imagine it's going to be case by case, right? I imagine strong hit chances additive. It would be really bad if it wasn't, right? If it is multiplicative, it is awful. So it depends, right? We don't know. And so don't ask people, hey, is this good or not? Because we don't know, right? If this does stack additively, it's phenomenal. It's great. Yeah, Citizen could be an anti-healer. Slap one curse too, right? Give him a Hades imprint, and then the person with the highest attack can no longer heal under acid. That's great. If it's multiplicative, then it's not good. You could do a better thing with your imprint, right? So yeah, I think that's it for imprints. That's it for my thing. If there's anything you disagree with or any more questions you have, my biggest questions, of course, we're gonna the stuff we just talked about here, along with the ISIS question, right? Can they target two separate enemy allies if you damage tune correctly, right? And by damage tune, like how much damage you're taking from the enemy, and how does attack up buff play with stat increases or defense up or whatever, right? With that, I will catch you guys next video and take care. Bye.